big thank you to Carlo and all the guest editors for putting this up. I think it adds very much to the dissemination level of science, but also to the scrutiny. Since I am the last one, and I didn't prepare pretty much the slides, but I think I'll make this more into a conversation rather than just a presentation. This is the last presentation, and the paper is really short. My name is Pedro Campos. I'm Vice President of Research at ITI. So ITI is the Interactive Technology Institute based in Madeira Island. So if you are looking for tropical exotic places to conduct HCI research, just Google us and we'll be happy to host you. This contribution was mainly about kind of an introspective tone for a paper that I hope I will never have to write anything similar again. Basically, we were conducting a series of research projects, like all of us, when social confinement measures became into place. So one of the problems in terms of HCI is not merely that we conduct evaluations in situ, so with real people. This is not astrophysics or mathematics. We are in pretty close contact to people. So that was the first barrier, the first challenge that everybody in HCI had to conduct. Basically, in the paper, we talk about 3 different case studies that are pretty much related with each other. They're all HCI and they were all conducted during social confinement measures. Here in the island, that time period was probably shorter than everywhere else because it was easier to control the pandemics. But in any case, the problems were pretty much the same. So what I was hoping to bring to the discussion was a series of reflections and techniques in line with the previous papers, by the way. So the 3 case studies were, first, we had a system for helping university students to overcome or mitigate the overusage of their smartphones. In this first project that we were conducting, the social confinement measures were just something that added up to the stress levels of this specific target population. The second one was about a mobile system that we were running and evaluating for supporting the needs of informal caregivers. Caregivers in charge, taking care of family members who suffer from dementia and therefore lived in care homes. This meant that they were already, in a way, isolated. But with the pandemics, they become not just isolated, but actually inaccessible. And I will explain in a couple of minutes what were the interesting conclusions of that case study. And third and finally, a virtual reality system that we were testing out with the specific aim of reducing stress and improving mental well-being. So the design and the evaluation of all of these systems was obviously performed during social confinement. So basically, in the paper, we present a list of risks, challenges, and lessons learned. So for instance, in the technology for helping students to avoid smartphone overuse, we got to a point where we understood that the problem was very prevalent among the students, especially during the exams period where they have to study. Typically, they used to, some of them, most of them, study in groups. We conducted a 4-week study with 16 university students that were undergoing stressful conditions, the global lockdown. And the main conclusion was that since the subjects became more aware of the time they spent using their smartphones, they were also able to adapt coping strategies in order to get a sense of their productivity as opposed to procrastinate their studying tasks. One point that I would like just to quickly point out is that the sudden lockdown did not hamper the original research plan. as we were already using smartphones to gather the data. So in principle, this was one of those projects where the global lockdown would not provoke a big impact, because the data was being collected from the smartphones and nobody stopped using their smartphones, quite the opposite. But it did bias the results, because the anxiety levels and other related metrics were, of course, influenced by the situation. Then in the second case study, we know that the unprecedented growth of the aging population in the planet gave rise to a growing number of family members who need to take care of their loved ones. And most family caregivers work either full or part-time, and this caregiver role gives an added responsibility, so there is a big burden. And in this case study, what you noticed as designers was that we needed mobile systems to help improve the informal caregivers' mental burden and also cognitive load, which was something not easy. Some of the conclusions was that the vast majority of research was focused on patient-centric solutions. And we need more research that directly tries to mitigate the caregiver's burden and the related distress. So most of the research performed in this series goes straight to the patient without going through the caregivers. Second point is that success is highly correlated with the acceptance of those technologies. So we need more techniques to explore how we can make these technologies more appealing and bring more added value to their lives. And the current solutions also don't accompany the disease progression. So if the condition becomes worse with or without COVID, the technologies are static. So we need more personalization over time. And finally, the current instruments to measure the impact of these interventions, in particular in what regards mental well-being, don't adequately reflect the caregiver's burden, as I mentioned before. Also, we also argued for coming up with a new evaluation scale to characterize the existing mental health technologies, which actually reminds me of a Nordic Eye workshop with some of the familiar faces here in this Zoom talk, at least two of them. Anyway, in terms of reflections and techniques, I would like to point out, just wrapping up, that we had some very positive aspects. For instance, in social confinement, it's easier to find more time to virtually meet with participants, just like we are doing right now, in their natural working environment, in their own devices. And it's actually cheaper and faster to conduct HCI remote evaluation sessions. This was something maybe we did not even consider doing before the pandemic, but I think now the mindset of HCI researchers has shifted a bit towards this fact. It's cheap and it's fast. It might not be ideal, but at least it's really fast. Also, depending on the level of boredomness that you are dealing with, or maybe where you are physically located during the confinement, you might have a more open attitude from potential participants. They might be more willing to participate in an experiment, a remote experiment, than in real life or in normal situations. However, there are many limitations and many risks. So we highlight in the paper that it's much more difficult to keep the participants focused. They will be less likely to pay attention and to cooperate for longer times. So one of the key lessons here is to keep it short. I guess by now we've all seen our colleagues, Zoom colleagues, houses and cats and dogs. but still it's difficult to maintain the engagement and the focus. This is also because there is this lack of personal contact that results in this more loose approach. In terms of the experiment execution, just to finish up, in the elderly project, in the elderly informal caregivers case study, there was an interesting thing because the nurses of the care homes had to act like proxies. So evidently, to actually evaluate the impact of a mobile system in both the informal caregivers and the patients, you would need to conduct in loco experiments. And that was the original plan. We just put the PhD students inside the care homes doing normal HCI techniques. But in this case, and especially because they are the more risky group in terms of COVID, what we did was we gave training to the nurses, and they were actually quite cooperative and helpful. And this had an unpredicted advantage, which was there was no intrusives. The experiments were conducted by the nurses themselves, and these are the same people that the patients, the seniors, were used to deal with in their everyday life. So I guess that experiment was good because they were observed in their normal living conditions. And this means less biases to the experiment. As we know, intrusiveness is a critical component of performing remote HCI research. It gets more difficult to obtain data and so on and so on. Okay, I guess that was basically it. Very short paper, very short contribution. And like I said, hopefully a one-in-a-lifetime paper. But I think the results and the lessons learned will remain for us forever, of course. Thanks.
Thank you, Pedro. And as your experience showed that as researchers, maybe we shouldn't postpone our experiments because currently we don't know what will happen tomorrow. And maybe the tomorrow's situation might be even more complicated. But yeah, I would also bring out the question of social presence because it's quite difficult to stay focused behind the screen, especially if you have so many other opportunities, what you can do with your screen and with your computer. And it's actually the same with our participants.